Hey guys, Ryan said, Lake St. Clair Fishing Guide. So every year this happens. I get a client or two that come up and jump in the boat with me. We drive a couple miles out into Lake St. Clair. We're miles offshore out in the middle of nowhere. We start catching some fish and they look at me and go, how do you even know where to start? And I'm sure that's a question that a lot of folks have if you're new to fishing the Great Lakes, or maybe you're coming up here from out of state, or maybe you're coming here for a guide trip and you're just curious how we go about finding some of these fish. What do we actually look for? There's nothing visual to look for. It all has to be done with your hummingbirds, with your graphs. But that's what I'd like to do in this video, kind of just give a few tips to show, kind of narrow down how to find a few things out here on the Great Lakes. So if you're coming up to the Great Lakes, obviously the first thing that you can do is get online and start doing some research. And if you do that, it's going to kind of put you in the ballpark. If you get on a St. Clair message board, for instance, you're going to hear places like the Mile Roads or the Metro Flats. If you start researching Lake Erie, maybe you'll hear about Pelee Island or the mouth of the Detroit River. That's just going to kind of get you in the area, and that's great, and that's info you definitely need to have and do. But if you take a place like the Metro Flats on St. Clair, depending on who you talk to, you're still talking 20 to 30 square miles of water that you have to break down. So I'd like to give you 4 tips on how to, once you get in an area like that, how to kind of break it down and how to think about it and what to be looking for. The first tip that I would give you, and one of the first things that I learned out on the Great Lakes, is if my graph goes up and down, if I'm reading my 2D graph and it goes up and down, it's worth fishing. It might not have a lot of fish, it might not have the biggest fish, but it is worth fishing. So if you're driving along and that graph goes up and down, wheel that boat around. Take a few minutes to try and fish it. Maybe use your side imaging if you see if you've got that. But if it goes up and down, it's definitely worth fishing on the Great Lakes. Even more so on Erie and Ontario. St. Clair's got a lot of sand. Sometimes those up and downs are just sandbars, but Erie and Ontario with all those rocks, definitely something worth fishing if you're watching that graph. The second thing that I would say is that subtle is better than dramatic. And what I mean by that is a big old change on the graph. I have found it'll probably have some fish, but the bigger fish and the larger quantities tend to be on more subtle things. There's an area way out in St. Clair called the dumping grounds, and your graph will go up 5-10 feet in some places. The dumping grounds has fish, but I have not found them to be on those dramatic changes. If I see my graph go up a foot or two, something like that, that's what I'm looking for. Third tip that I would give is that smallmouth love opposites. So what I mean by that is that if you're driving along and it's just grass, 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 and all of a sudden there's a break in that grass and then the grass starts up again, that break is where they're at. Conversely, if you're driving along and it's just a flat bottom, flat sandy bottom, and all of a sudden you get a little bit of stubble, that's where you need to be looking. So smallmouth like opposites. Whatever is going on in the area, they want something different, and usually not something too big either. They like little small concentrations of things that they can hang around. So a smallmouth is a very visual feeder, so they like to have a little bit of an ambush point, but they want to be able to see a long way. And then the fourth tip that I would give is kind of wrapped up in the first 3, and that's my eyes never come off this 2D graph. I know everybody loves the live imaging and the side imaging, and that's all really good stuff, and I use all that stuff too. But don't underestimate the importance of being able to read your 2D graph and read it well. When I drop my boat in the water, this 2D graph comes on and it does not go off until the day's over. And I've been in the boats with folks that have hired me, wanted to take their own boat, and I tell them, get that 2D graph on. We got to be watching that thing, because this is how you're going to find and be able to break down those larger areas first. Once you see some things on your 2D graph, then we can come back with a side imaging or a live imaging situation, and then we can break it down even farther. But that 2D graph, learning how to read it, learning how to look at bottom thickness, ups and downs, things like that, that's going to be very important. So do your research on learning how to read these graphs and learning how to read them well. So those are my 4 tips. Hopefully that's helpful for you. I love talking fishing. If you're coming up here and you're looking for some more tips, feel free to hit me up on Facebook, Instagram. Be happy to help out.